No matter how the upcoming award season turns out, one thing already feels certain. The most talked about movie of the year is Paul Thomas Anderson's new film, One Battle After Another. The movie split audiences right down the middle. Some people walked out thrilled, others walked out annoyed. The internet instantly turned scenes into memes.
Pretty small beers.
Stores are already selling that exact costume, and the box office numbers are making studio accountants break into cold sweats. A chunk of viewers are brushing the whole thing off, calling it a sloppy political PSA. Critics, on the other hand, are showering it with praise and acting like Anderson should be crowned National Treasure of the Year. And PTA himself looks like he's quietly doubling down on his reputation as a modern legend who basically never misses. So what's really going on here? Why is this movie way more complicated than it first appears? How does Leonardo DiCaprio play a character who's both a clownish mess and a surprisingly honest portrait of a burned-out idealist? And why does the final chase scene feel like it deserves at least an Oscar nomination all by itself?
Let's do a selfie. Oh my God, you got it. Water. We did it. We did it.
One Battle After Another is technically based on Thomas Pynchon's novel Vineland, a book so wild and tangled that most directors won't even go near it. And for good reason. His stories twist like a maze, and the cast of characters is so huge it's easier to lose track of them in your head than on the screen. Paul Thomas Anderson has already tried to wrangle Pynchon once. 10 years ago, he made Inherent Vice, and his new film feels like its spiritual sequel. Back then, it was a hazy, psychedelic neo-noir trip with Joaquin Phoenix, watching America whip from the chaos of the 60s straight into a conservative backlash. Now it's an action comedy where Leonardo DiCaprio plays a revolutionary who's completely burned out on his own ideals. And again, we're watching someone say goodbye to youthful rebellion, only this time set against today's anxieties.
What's your last name?
Batman.
Okay, come on, I need to know your real last name.
Parker. Peter Parker, man.
And honestly, Vineland as a whole isn't meant for Hollywood at all. Trying to put its full absurdity and energy on screen is basically impossible. Anderson knows this, and instead of wrestling with it, he just boldly, almost ruthlessly, cuts entire storylines out. Which is why what he keeps becomes that much more important. At the heart of the movie isn't Pynchon's world of conspiracies, paranoia, and political theater. It's a messy, funny, painfully human story about family. About a father who never got his life together, and a daughter trying to decide whether his dreams are worth believing in. Family isn't just a recurring theme for Paul Thomas Anderson. It's basically his artistic obsession. You can spot it in almost every film he's made. His stories build families in all kinds of combinations. Fathers and sons, brother-sister pairs, substitute parents, spiritual guardians, biological relatives, and people who just end up becoming family along the way. One Battle After Another carries that tradition forward, but flips it in an unexpected way. Strip away the shootouts, the satire, and the absurd chaos, and what you get is a classic soap opera setup. Who is Willa's real father? The lovable screw-up Bob, or the hard-edged military man Stephen Lockjaw? And meanwhile, Willa herself is searching for her mysteriously vanished mother. Anderson turns his usual dynamic on its head. In most of his films, the main character has to make peace with a complicated father figure, literal or symbolic. Here, for the first time, the director seems to be standing on the parent's side, watching a dad terrified of losing his child and scrambling to become the person she needs. Beneath all the gunfire, slapstick, and madcap chases hides a much quieter story, almost a traditional coming-of-age tale. It's about a teenager who, step by step, through setbacks, shocks, and hard lessons, slowly finds her own voice and learns to stand on her own feet. The real center of the story turns out to be Willa. She's the one who changes the most. She grows up, makes big decisions, and takes responsibility for herself. Next to her, Bob doesn't look like a true protagonist. He's more of a fake main character, a guide through the movie's chaos who barely impacts what actually happens. Sure, DiCaprio's character constantly stumbles into ridiculous trouble like he wandered in from a silent slapstick comedy. but the plot still moves forward without him. Other characters make the big choices, the climax unfolds while he's not even around, and when everything finally comes together, he shows up late, in every possible sense. Bob's job in the story is to be led. He follows orders, goes with the flow, and lets almost everyone else steer him.
Are you diabetic? Are you diabetic?
And here's the fun twist. Audiences might love watching DiCaprio slip into this laid-back, Big Lebowski-style persona. But beneath that chill exterior, the character is basically a mediocre revolutionary. He's not a true believer, not a zealot, not a leader. He's a guy who happened to be standing near a movement when the fireworks went off, back when he was young enough to pretend it mattered. And the second a daughter enters his life, he drops the last bits of rebellion. Almost overnight, he becomes a stay-at-home dad clinging to routine, practically a defender of the same family values he once claimed to be fighting against.
Come on, lack of original. Would you stop with all this bullshit? Would you stop it? We're a goddamn family. You have her to take care of.
The tragedy of DiCaprio's character is that he just can't let go of the past. Bob lives in old memories. He keeps rewatching the Battle of Algiers like he's trying to drag himself back to a time when he felt young and powerful. And he takes it painfully hard watching his daughter slowly pull away from him.
Say it, baby.
Love you, Bob.
Love you too.
A few critics have pointed out, not without reason, that practically any A-list actor could have played this role. But it's honestly hard to complain when DiCaprio's this much fun to watch. Anderson clearly knows it too. His best scenes let Leo take over the screen with long, uninterrupted shots that show every beat of his performance without hiding behind edits.
If you can't answer what time is it, I cannot give you the rendezvous point. This is a key tenet of the rebellion. I'm surprised you can't name it.
The movie's structure doesn't follow a clean, traditional arc. It behaves exactly like the world it's depicting: messy, chaotic, unpredictable. The first 40 minutes are basically pure prologue focused on a revolutionary cell. Nothing major happens, but instead, Anderson slowly opens up his cast and tone. Sure, you could trim that part, but he turns it into its own little thrill ride. Fast, jumpy, and as wild as a jazz improv session. And underneath all the jokes, stumbles, gunfire, and frantic escapes lies a much bigger world, just like in Pynchon's books. Secret networks, oddball groups, mysterious figures, everything hints at a massive story the movie barely scratches. Who is the sensei, really? Why are desert nuns running around with rebels? What the hell is the Christmas Adventure Club supposed to be? We don't get answers, and weirdly enough, that's part of the magic of Anderson's universe.
All hail Saint Nick.
You feel the depth of the world even when you're only shown the surface. As the story moves forward, the movie wraps the viewer tighter and tighter in a cloud of paranoia. It feels like everyone is spying on everyone else. Someone's peeking through binoculars, someone's lining up a shot through a rifle scope, and every character walks around with the sense that a pair of unseen eyes is watching from the shadows. Stephen Lockjaw's arc drives home the point. No matter how much power you think you've stacked up, there's always a force bigger, colder, and more faceless waiting to crush you. Everyone in this world is a pawn, no matter how important they imagine themselves to be. That vibe puts the movie right in line with the films of the New Hollywood era, the 70s, a period Paul Thomas Anderson clearly worships. You can see it in almost everything he makes: distrust of government, broken faith in institutions, and the idea that behind America's polished storefront sits nothing but chaos and muscle. Just like in Pynchon's writing, one battle after another is a straight-up argument with reality, a challenge you can't easily ignore. The film pretends to be a wacky comedy, but it's wrestling with real issues. A world splitting again into camps, left versus right, idealists versus gatekeepers, people hungry for change versus people terrified of losing control. Only here, the story unfolds in a different register, in a version of America that feels almost real, but not quite ours. In the movie, things seem to start in the early 2000s, but in real life, after 9/11, there was no wave of underground leftist militancy. If anything, the opposite happened. Patriotism surged, law enforcement ballooned, and the country swung conservative. And immigration wasn't the political flashpoint it was destined to become years later. So Anderson isn't reenacting history, he's sketching out an alternate one, a timeline where the fears and anxieties of our era just show up a bit sooner and burn a bit hotter. There's even a theory that part of one battle after another actually takes place in the future. Which isn't a crazy idea if you remember that Paul Thomas Anderson is obsessed with the past. His movies usually live in yesterday more than today, and this one also feels slightly out of time. Smartphones, new music, and modern topics are there, but you could drop the whole story into the 70s or early 80s and barely notice a change. That's how nostalgic and anachronistic this version of America feels. Visually, Anderson almost seems to under-detail the world on purpose. The city and everyday life feel stylized and simplified, like props from a graphic novel. But that's the point. He's shooting a genre story, not a political documentary.
Bitch, I felt like Tony Montana!
That heightened comic book style lets him sidestep any direct commentary on Trump, Biden, or whatever administration is in power, and keeps the film from turning into a weekly cable news rant. So it's hard to accuse Anderson of picking a side outright. Sure, he clearly has sympathy for the rebels. That's not exactly subtle. But nobody here gets to be the good guys. The right-wing faction is shown as violent zealots, obsessed with control, paranoia, and racial supremacy, and Sean Penn's eyes alone could headline a horror movie. Meanwhile, the left doesn't come off any better. They act like grown-up children playing revolution for the thrill of it, trying on radicalism like a costume.
Stop fucking moving, man.
But the second the situation stops being fun, they freeze, panic, and turn on each other one by one.
If I was in your shoes, I wouldn't be scared either. I just don't know if your sister would feel that way.
So instead of the usual good versus evil setup, Anderson shows a world where both sides are either disconnected from reality or maybe never had a grip on it to begin with. For all the chaos and wild energy in one battle after another, the film still gives us one version of resistance that feels genuinely admirable. That's Sensei, played by Benicio del Toro, the calm leader of a group of undocumented immigrants. He's fighting too, but without slogans, ego, or heroic branding. He works quietly and carefully, not for the cause, but for the actual people who rely on him.
Sensei, please.
Courage, Bob. Courage.
But the movie's biggest hope for the future is Willa. She's still a rebel, but no longer a reckless one. She has her own moral compass and a backbone strong enough to use it. She feels like a blend of her many parents. Her mother's fire and defiance, Lockjaw's physical and emotional toughness, Sensei's grounded wisdom, and Bob's warmth, charisma, and basic humanity. So it's no surprise one battle after another is already being talked up as an awards season favorite. And it's not just because of the cast, it's because Paul Thomas Anderson once again made a movie that doesn't resemble anything else in theaters. Visually, it's the most unmodern movie about modern life you could imagine. And it's not just the texture of the picture, though the film looks almost handcrafted. The real magic is in the directing and the camera work. So many scenes are shot in actual long takes or staged so cleverly that they feel like long takes, letting you experience the moment without the rhythm being chopped up by editing. Where most directors would cut 5 or 6 times, Anderson designs a single camera path that does all the heavy lifting. It's pure old-school filmmaking, the kind of craftsmanship that used to be everywhere and now feels like a lost art. And Anderson's here to remind everyone that skill never really went away. Anderson keeps the tension tight, and he does it almost invisibly. Thanks to clever in-camera transitions, the movie barely gives the audience a moment to breathe. You only get a break during the rare still shots, mostly during dialogue. But even the conversations sometimes feel like they're moving, especially when characters are talking in a car that's flying down the road.
No fear. Just like Tom Cruise.
And speaking of cars, that final chase has already turned into a meme, and not by accident. First, the location does half the storytelling all by itself. Hills and blind curves constantly block what's ahead. You never know what's waiting over the next rise. Second, the editing is flawless. Even though we're cutting between 3 different character perspectives, the scene is totally clear, which is pretty wild, even for huge studio action movies. Third, Anderson throws in what feels like a silent film jump scare, a moment with the same punch as the old train rushing at the camera shot. Right when you think everything is under control, he yanks the floor out from beneath you. And in the end, the chase becomes the perfect visual metaphor for the film's title. If the road represents life, then life isn't a smooth highway. It's a constant series of climbs and drops, exactly the kind of one battle after another the movie promises. Composer Johnny Greenwood clearly picked up on that. He builds the score around a pedal tone, a single unchanging note that sits underneath shifting chords. Will one battle after another end up a classic? Time's gonna make that call. But right now, it's obvious this is a rare film. One that's fun to watch for 2.5 hours and fun to talk about afterward. And it might end up being more important than it looks. A snapshot of anxious 2020's energy, a story about generations stuck between what was and what's coming next, and a gentle push from Anderson telling us to stop clinging to old fights and finally look forward, even if all that's waiting down the road is another battle.